We had reached the last months of 1818. Nature had come to the emperor's aid and allowed us to believe that his health was improving. But this was only an appearance. He had found distractions in work in his small gardens. The ladies had each offered the consolations the emperor could expect from them out of friendship. When the final days of December brought back the symptoms Dr. O'Meara had attempted to combat previously. The emperor was taking no precautions against the weather. He would withdraw his legs from the flannel sack in which he kept them part of the morning to warm his feet, slip on silk stockings, small buckled shoes, a pair of white cloth trousers, and go outside and let himself be taken unaware by the coolness of the evening. Having thus remained outside too late, he caught a cold that at first was only an irritation, but soon became a serious infection causing nausea, vomiting, chills, and fever. The ailments in his leg recurred, and I brought him some relief with rub-downs. But as for the cold, the emperor fought it only with totally insufficient use of his licorice. The emperor had been suffering this way for only a few days when January 1st, 1819 arrived. He was not able, as he had been the preceding years, to have a family luncheon, as he called it, but he did not want the children to miss out because of that. He asked me for some gold coins and gave this to them for their New Year's presents. The Grand Marshal and Count de Montslon thought the emperor was sufficiently ill to urge him to be attended by Dr. Stocco from the Conqueror, as he did not want the help of Dr. Verling, the doctor imposed on Longwood by Hudson Lowe. The emperor reminded the Grand Marshal of the bitter correspondence he had had with the governor during the preceding visits and said it would only renew them to call on him. However, after much insistence, the emperor on January 10th allowed the Grand Marshal to call for that doctor. On the 17th, as he had no news and the emperor's condition was getting worse, the Grand Marshal wrote again, insisting that he come as soon as possible, because the emperor's situation was worsening each day. It was only on the 19th that the doctor arrived, apologizing for all the difficulties he had had in coming to Longwood and declaring that judging from all the obstacles placed in his way today in coming to visit his patient, he was almost sure that similar permission would not be granted him the following day. Brought to the emperor's bedside, he examined him at length, saw his legs, and found the symptoms already described by Dr. O'Meara. He suggested bloodletting and prescribed a few pills each day and leg rub-downs. Fearing he would not be admitted to see his patient anymore, he wrote the Grand Marshal a letter in which he indicated a diet to follow, and in view of the seriousness of the illness, urged the famous patient to use Dr. Verling if he was not called to the honor of bringing his own ministrations. The Grand Marshal proposed that he replace Dr. O'Meara at the emperor's bedside under the conditions stipulated by the governor, and Dr. Stocco said he would accept those conditions if the governor and his admiral did not object to it. Informed by the Grand Marshal of Dr. Stocco's decision, the emperor dictated the following note to Count de Montslon to be sent to Plantation House. Dr. Stocco must remain at Longwood if he is to continue the treatment interrupted since Dr. O'Meara's departure. That is, for the past 6 months. This has considerably aggravated the hepatitis, the first symptoms of which were noticed some 16 months ago. The emperor's entire state of health is in disarray. It is necessary that Dr. Stocco see the patient several times a day. The attack the day before yesterday is the 5th one. In the last 6 months, all occur at night. Count Bertrand and Count de Montslon were with the patient without the help of any professional. Never had the attacks been as serious as that of the other night, and for a moment they despaired of the emperor's life. Count Bertrand offered to summon Dr. Verling, but the patient refused. That very offer altered his appearance and increased his illness at that moment. Count Bertrand therefore called at 2 a.m. for Dr. Stocco, who arrived at 6 a.m. The duty officer is not authorized to write to town. They had to request the governor's permission, which doubled the travel time, and the doctor arrived too late. Fortunately, the patient's strong constitution overcame the attack. Thus, we have confirmation of what was stated in Count de Montslon's letter, addressed to the governor on July 26th last, when Dr. O'Meara, who had been removed from Longwood, was still in town. Even in the last throes of death, the emperor shall receive care and medication only from the hands of his own doctor. If he is deprived of them, he will receive no one and will consider himself to have been assassinated by you. When Dr. Stocco arrived, he went to see General Bertrand. The latter proposed that he replace Dr. O'Meara and showed him the 7 articles sent to the governor. He accepted and was then shown in to the patient. The governor could not prevent this transaction, either directly or indirectly, without revealing his position. Thus, the treatment of the disease, which has been interrupted for 6 months, is again suspended until the arrival of the French doctor. The hepatitis will do even more damage during this last period. And should it finally become incurable, who will have killed the emperor? What has happened in the last 6 months causes to fear he may have one attack a month. And if he calls for Dr. Stokoe, he will arrive too late. Should the patient someday die of this, who will have killed him? The world and history answer that question loudly. Longwood, January 19th, 1819. The governor replied to this letter, which was not signed, as follows. No communication relative to Napoleon Bonaparte can be received if it does not bear his signature or that of one of his officers who, in that case, must clearly state he is writing and signing by his order. When the paper attached hereto has been thus signed, it will be replied to. Plantation House, January 19th, 1819. Dr. Stokoe was authorized to come on the 20th and the 21st, but he did not reappear on the 22nd. During those 2 days, reports on the emperor's health were given to the governor by this doctor, who was subjected each time to an interrogation on what had been done or said in his presence in the patient's bedroom. The governor told him he did not believe any of this alleged illness, that he was only trying to fool him, and that it was nothing but a play to support Dr. O'Meara's statement regarding General Bonaparte's illness. Admiral Plampin declared he needed the doctor's services on board. Several months later, he was sent to London to appear before an Admiralty Board. I am told he was accused of having been bribed by Napoleon's money and was demoted. The bloodletting that had been performed had a beneficial effect. The headaches disappeared. The Cheltenham, although the emperor took it very reluctantly, brought him great relief. He again took the mercury pills he had given up since Dr. O'Meara's departure. The rub-downs restored circulation to his legs, and little by little, his strong constitution overpowered the illness and allowed him to resume the work which frequent illness had interrupted. The emperor had barely gotten better and was beginning to recover his strength when I myself became gravely ill. Without any warning, I was busy drawing a few sketches for the ladies' embroidery at their request when I was seized with awful intestinal pain that forced me to go to bed. The attack was as violent as it was sudden. I summoned Dr. Verling, who found I had a rapid pulse but no fever. He put off bloodletting until the following day in case the temperature went up, and gave me some medication to calm me. I remained in bed 3 weeks. Informed by Saint-Denis that I was in bed and of the suffering that had put me there, the emperor, although he was ill himself, had the extreme kindness to come up to my bedroom, accompanied by the Grand Marshal. The room was located under the roof, just above his own, separated from the burning rays of the tropical sun only by lathing and some slates. The heat was excessive in spite of the door and the windows being open. He cannot remain here, the emperor said to the Grand Marshal. You must have a bed placed in my library. I begged the emperor not to do this, thinking of the disruption my moving into that room would cause. The next morning I was settled there, and I remained there for the duration of my illness. When he went from his bedroom to the drawing room, the emperor never failed to stop at the library door to ask how I felt. Dr. Verling deplored that the emperor's appearances did not occur while he was visiting me, regretting that the emperor refused to be taken care of by him. He knew the emperor's repugnance was not for himself before the governor's wanting to impose a doctor on him. He did not know that when the emperor was about to go into the drawing room, the door to the dining room, which was between the bedroom and the library, was locked so that he would not find himself on the emperor's path. The pills he gave me to take me were mercury pills. They soon loosened my teeth and caused blisters in my mouth. He then said he had the disease under control. When I started my convalescence, I was ordered to take baths. The emperor heard this, and as there was no other bathtub at Longwood except his own, he told me to use it. I thanked him, saying that Dr. Verling was going to send a wooden tub from the town hospital. I mention these details only because they indicate the emperor's kindness. When I resumed my duties with the emperor, I looked very much like Lazarus. You have been affected, he said to me. These British doctors are used to treating horses with chicken broth. You would have recovered from this with that help of what they call heroic medicines. I also learned with some pleasure that being accustomed to my care, he had felt deprived of it during my illness. Saint-Denis and Novaras also offered care, even devotion, he said of them. but they don't know my habits as Marchand does. The way I had been stricken recalled the illness leading to Cipriani's death. At the beginning, everyone was quite worried. Expressions of interest were shown me by Countess Montauban and Bertrand, who were kind enough to ask how I was. My strength slowly returned. Until then, I had always slept across the Emperor's bedroom door in the room adjoining his. Starting from that time, he did not want me to do so anymore, fearing I might have a relapse. If he happened to need me, he had one of the valets send for me. During the day, he believed the way to entertain me was to occupy me as he had previously done when he did not have one of these gentlemen at hand, by having me write under his dictation or having me read to him. The emperor had not acquired in St. Helena this portliness that many people took in pleasure ascribing to him. He was as he had been during the 100 days. Suffering often caused shadows under his eyes, but the gaze had lost nothing of the penetrating character for which it was known. His face was quite pale, and his flesh had lost its hair. He said he felt like his side was being cut out, as if a razor blade was stuck into him. No matter what annoyances the governor seemed to want to overwhelm his existence with, his courage never failed. On the contrary, he appeared to stiffen against the harassment visited on him every day by the governor. The strength of his constitution, along with his occupations and his ordinary strolls, seemed to have overpowered illness. He was worried about Countess de Montauban's health. She was suffering seriously from her liver. If she did not go riding in his carriage, he never failed to go every day to see her. And it was the same for Countess Bertrand if she was ill. Never did either of these ladies find him indifferent. The emperor busied himself commenting on the campaigns of Turenne, Frederick, Hannibal, and Marlborough, which he dictated to Count de Montauban. He dictated to me some comments on Caesar's campaigns, and he made notes on Rogna, the Abbé de Prat, and Jomini. He took up field fortifications with Grand Marshal, dictated portions of it to me, and had me make drawings. In one of the shipments of books sent to him by Lady Holland were 2 small volumes entitled Souvenirs de Madame de Ronde. I had known that lady when she was in the service of Empress Louise. She had the title of First Lady in Waiting. They numbered 6 at the time. My curiosity was aroused, and while the emperor was devouring the books I had set on the table near the settee where he was sitting, I glanced at the 2 books. That evening when he went to bed, I reviewed them for him, telling him that this lady claimed the emperor never went near Empress Marie-Louise without asking if her dress was made of very fine linen, because linen reminded him of a woman he had dearly loved, who always wore it. "What nonsense," he replied. "I liked fine linen because I wished to favor the city of Saint-Quentin." The next day, when I picked up that book, along with those scattered across the rug, I found written in pencil in the emperor's hand, particularly in the margin of the first volume's pages, comments such as false, absurd, nonsense. I must say that, with the exception of certain passages deserving the emperor's disapproval, the balance was written with good intention, and that it suffered perhaps from ignorance, but not ill will. Many notes were written in the margins of the emperor's correspondence published by the bookseller Pancuca, and on Monsieur de Fleury's de Chaboulon book. The emperor read it with pleasure, and refutation of Rognac's work by Colonel Marbeau. He said of that book, "It is written by a young man, but that is how one should write, and confound the detractors of the glory of France." This book earned its author a mention in the emperor's will for 100,000 francs, and the recommendation that he write about the campaigns from 1793 to 1815. To write otherwise than Marbeau does in his refutation of Rognac, the emperor said, is to stain one's uniform. When a satirical tract came to his attention, he read it and often laughed at the silly things said about him. If someone happened to be present, he would read out loud the passage that had provoked his laughter and say, "What nonsense is fed to the public? What do you want? What must sell? Time will do justice to all that." If, on the contrary, the book was well written, even if it said something against him, he said with the same modesty, "It has good in it," or "It's a good work." The newspapers related to the city of Rennes' refusal to accept a statue of Moreau that the government had intended for one of the squares in that town. "This," he said, is how ministers lead sovereigns into making mistakes. It would hurt the inhabitants of Rennes' natural pride to send them the statue of a man killed in the ranks of the enemy. The emperor reminisced about what, during his childhood, had provided the background for good manners. The fireside chat is a lost art in France, he said. There are no more of these witty and spirited conversations that made for such pleasant evenings. The family spirit is being lost, and with it, the respect for the young, for the elderly. The Grand Marshal told him that the arrival of his library had changed nothing in his dictation, and that the facts as well as the dates had been in agreement with the research he had done. The emperor replied, "It's because my memory comes from the heart, and it keeps a faithful record of everything that is dear to it." His relaxation through light reading included Paul and Virginie, Don Quixote, Manon Lescaut, and the novels of Madame de Cotin, Madame de Souza, Madame de Stael, and Charles XII, whose body was like his head, he said, made of iron. The emperor's health appeared to be better. I told him so one day and expressed the happiness we all felt over this. He came close to me, he took me by the ear, and he said, "Don't believe it, my son. I haven't long to live. It is right here," he said, showing me the area of his liver. "This is only a moment of rest granted me by nature. The illness will again gain upper hand and do me in." I was saddened by the emperor's words, without, however, believing in his prediction. In any case, this welcome peace, often disturbed by the government, was soon to be even more so by a departure deeply affecting the emperor. Countess de Montsalon was seriously ill, and Dr. Verling had declared that the climate would prevent her recovery. Her departure was decided following a consultation that was submitted to the emperor. This departure would deprive the emperor of a person whom he valued. His social life was to be completely disrupted. Through her wit, to which the emperor had become pleasantly accustomed, she provided some distraction to his work, and the time he spent with her played a large part in his daily routine. Her children, through their games, broke up the monotony of Longwood. A great void was to follow, for him and for the colony. The emperor had always been grateful to her for having remained pent up with her husband and child in a single room in order to be near him when we arrived at Longwood, hence his affection for this lady. This departure worried Count de Montsalon, who saw his wife leaving alone with 3 children and a nurse without even being sure where she would land. Her maid remained on the island to marry Novaras. The emperor did not want this marriage to take place, as he did not find it in the interest of a man whom he wished well, and it was to deprive Countess de Montsalon of her maid during such a long voyage. Madame de Montsalon had insisted that the emperor keep Monsieur de Montsalon with him, and begged him not to oppose the fortunate offer made to her servant, Josephine, to remain in St. Helena and marry Novaras. On the eve of the departure, the emperor again spoke to Count de Montsalon of his last wish, that he not let his wife leave alone, and that he accompany the countess. "Sire," replied the general, "Madame de Montsalon does not want to add to her regrets at leaving your majesty that of depriving him of the services I may be able to offer him here. Her decision is made, and so is mine. I am remaining with your majesty." "Then see to it that she lacks nothing on board the ship on which she is to go." Orders were given to Monsieur Pierron, the butler, for provisions of all kinds to be placed on board, and this in addition to the price agreed on for her transport to Europe. Letters of credit for a sum of 200,000 francs and 20,000 franc pension were given to her before she left Longwood. The day chosen for the departure having arrived, the emperor went into the drawing room to receive Madame de Montsalon and her children. He thanked her for the sacrifice she was making in letting her husband remain with him, and gave her a rich gold box with his portrait surrounded by very large diamonds, assuring her of his wishes for her happiness and that of her family. He gave her various instructions for Europe and his family, which the countess received in tears. The poor children shared their mother's sorrow. It soon became such a sad scene that the emperor, too moved himself, did not wish to prolong it. He embraced them one after another and went back into his apartment. "These tears hurt me," he said to me, "and poor Montsalon appears overwhelmed with sorrow. I did not want that sacrifice, but both of them wanted it. He is going to find a great void when he comes home this evening, so that he will be less lonely. I believe you should take a room in his lodging." The emperor had undressed to bathe, and as he was coming out of his room to get into his bath, the carriage was leaving. Without being seen, by raising a corner of the curtain, he could see Madame De Montsalon's last look at the house, where so much glory and grandeur remained connected, mixed with memories of friendship. It was also a final goodbye. Count de Montsalon was accompanying his wife and his children on horseback to town. He had received permission to go on board the ship on which she was sailing and to remain there until it hoisted its sails, so that he came back to Longwood very late and did not see the emperor until that evening.